Well, it's time for Media Watch, and James Creedon is here with us in the studio.
Hi, Laura.
James, of course, the coronavirus is a top story around the world on social media as well. People expressing how worried they are and trying to share information, really, because that is part of the battle, isn't it? Getting the information
absolutely.
out. Here in France, the number of cases has doubled. That's been announced in the last hour. So we're now at 38 cases here in France.
That's right. So, it's front page news as it is everywhere. But certainly something has shifted today in terms of France's attitude towards it, and a sense that it is worsening. A lot of things. So the front pages this morning, Le Parisien saying it's now France's turn to feel the pressure. Of course, France had been sort of spared while neighbouring Italy had quite a lot more cases. And as you just said, we can see now in Le Monde and elsewhere talk of cases going from 18 up to 38 according to their figures. And already we'd seen, the carnival down in Nice, various other festivities in Menton, all of this on the Côte d'Azur, nearest to the Italian border, cancelled, as we saw also in Venice. So certainly it does appear that preparations, at least, are for a worsening of things, are crossing over the border from Italy. Even headlines such as this talking then about the effect of coronavirus on, for example, China's globalization project, using the word Chernobyl. This will be China's Chernobyl. That sounds very dramatic, but that's the kind of language we're seeing in Serious News Weekly, Le Point, their coverage of things. Then this is an interesting one because, of course, people on the far right who don't really like open borders. It's
a great excuse to shut down borders, isn't it?
Exactly. And so they're talking here about Homo Coronavirus, which is sort of a little bit of a reference to maybe a not very evolved human being. Now, that's obviously, tongue-in-cheek to an extent, but I'll quote that piece in L'Opinion. A mammal marked by its inward-looking and tribalist nature. That's the Homo Coronavirus. Everywhere, nationalists are rubbing their hands with glee. Unless the government wants to add fuel to the fire of the far-right anti-immigrant rhetoric, they ought not to allow their talking points to be contaminated by a catastrophist discourse. So this piece basically is warning governments and ministers and whatnot to have measured language, to take a responsible approach, and that is the best one against the epidemic, and not people taking advantage of it, if you like.
Yeah.
People even imagining, Laura, that what would happen if Emmanuel Macron was infected, if he'd have to be quarantined for 2 weeks. That might seem preposterous, but you'll remember the Iranian deputy health minister wiping his brow there.
During a press conference.
Because he was contaminated himself. So it's not that far-fetched anymore to be talking about that. Emmanuel Macron, of course, did say this morning... Doesn't discriminate.
No, it doesn't.
Doesn't discriminate. Rich, poor, old, young. Well, so in any case, he did say today during a visit to hospital that it's a crisis and an epidemic is coming.
And then he said in Italy that there's no chance they'll be closing the border with Italy,
right?
As well. All right. Let's talk about what's happening in the United States, because we haven't talked about that so much. President Trump is getting a lot of criticism over his handling of the crisis. He's named his vice president, Mike Pence, as the kind of a task force for this, isn't it?
That's right. And there was a lot
Not known for his
no
science.
Well, he wouldn't be the most scientific of men, and people were sort of pointing to his track record and saying, look, really, is he the best person to be overseeing this? But the Democrats are also getting criticised for, this is an AP fact check, for distorting the readiness of the US for an epidemic of any kind. So there's criticism on both sides. This is just kind of more on the criticism of the Democrats. The financial markets are on a downward spiral because crackhead Democrats are spinning misinformation and fear-mongering about the coronavirus to hurt Donald Trump. So you can see the extent to which there's and then on the other side...
I think the New York Times called it the Trump virus.
Oh, there you go. Well, it's kind of being politicised. And this is on the other side of the political divide. We have a president who uses a press conference on a looming pandemic as a political messaging rally, attacking his political opponents, promoting his re-election. So basically, on either side, it's being sort of seen...
Did you notice that?
Say again?
He spelt it wrong as well.
Oh gosh, did he?
Coronavirus.
He needs to tweet with more caution. Now, meanwhile, the Russians, according to this piece in the Washington Post, they are citing US officials saying that thousands of Russian-linked accounts on social media have been posting almost identical messages in lots of different languages on the coronavirus. So that's what flags it as a bit bizarre if the message is identical. All echoing narratives on basically that the West forged the virus or made up the virus in a US lab. So that sort of conspiracy theory aspect that the virus was fabricated and made in a US lab is being
even though it originated in China.
Spread. Well, it's being spread now. This particular conspiracy theory.
The conspiracy theories are spreading faster than the virus, aren't they?
There you go. So everybody seems to be using it for their own ends politically.
And I just have to say some news just in. Over in California, health officials are monitoring almost 9,000 people after they arrived on domestic flights. That's just in. So we'll have to keep an eye on what is happening in the United States. Do we need to point out to people that they cannot catch the coronavirus from drinking certain types of beer?
It's bizarre, isn't it? But the actual sales of Corona beer have actually sunk. This is data here. You can see
it's one of those brand names people are really
just people
banging
maybe a
their
bit
head
put
over.
off by it. They're not necessarily consciously afraid, but they don't really necessarily want
It's
to buy it.
subconscious, isn't it? Your hand.
That's it.
Go further down the aisle.
That's it. Now, there were some bad taste jokes. People saying, oh, maybe Corona needs to rebrand. Is that a bad taste joke? Yes, it is. But that's been circulating for a while. And I'll just finish on this because some are actually kind of bringing in the whole Homo Coronavirus thing that I was talking about earlier, saying, because it is a Mexican beer. The border wall needs to be built, says Joe McCarthy, tongue-in-cheek. In order to keep illegal Mexican beer out, stick to real American beer, Bud Light. So it's, there's a joke there, but there's also...
I don't think they have any cases in Mexico as yet.
Not that I've heard of so far, but, that the border is going up, creeping into even jokes online, whether they be
so many
tasteful or
metaphors.
tasteless. Yes.
James, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Indeed,
Laura.
a very serious subject.
Yes.
Of course, a lot of people ill and a lot of people dying from that virus. So we are
right.
taking it very seriously. Thank you very much, James
Thanks,
Creedon
Laura.
there. Now, time for our focus report.